everybody. It is Romania Black, and we're on episode 6 of Natsume's Book of Friends, or Natsume Yujin-Cho, and I am just absolutely having a blast with this show so far. It's been a lot of fun, and there's been a lot of awesome comments that you all have left for this series, so thank you for that. I really appreciate it, but I want to dive into those comments and talk about them because there are quite a few to get through before we start this episode. So let's just dive in. Seppi talked about from episode 3 that Suzu in is it Mrs. Suzu? The yokai from the episode. Suzu means little bell, which is why they had little bells throughout their ears. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense, definitely. But also, I really liked the idea that Seppi as well as Kuzu were both talking about, and the idea of Natsumi starting the conversation with Tanuma, and that being the first step towards socializing with those people. And I did have some really good comments from Kazu and Seppi and some others about kind of the difference between Tanuma's interactions with Natsumi and Natsumi feeling comfortable with Tanuma because he relates a lot to Tanuma. They both can kind of see spirits. They're both kind of outcasts that are connected to the supernatural. So they're kind of a support network for each other. And Kazu made a point of saying of Natsumi avoiding Sasada could be because he can't relate to her. Kind of like the older woman the woman in episode 2 that wanted to relate to the yokai, but she could only kind of look from afar. And that maybe Natsumi was like, he's afraid of being ostracized by her if it gets out what he tells her. So that could very well be the case, but I think that for me, I'm a communications major, so I constantly am like, come on, just talk to each other. Like, that's the first step towards bridging those gaps, and there's always going to be that unknown factor there until you reach across the aisle and communicate with them. So, and I know that they're in high school. I know that's difficult. For me, as a communications major, I'm just somebody that like, oh no, I want to bridge those communications. And I think that the next step Natsumi should make after getting, together with Tanuma and communicating with him should be to reach across to Sasada, because Sasada is willing. Sasada wants to talk to Natsumi, but there's still that barrier there. And so I feel like the show at some point is going to have him reach out and talk to Sasada, because from what we know now, and we're only 6 episodes in, so we don't know a whole lot, but from what we know now, it seems that Reiko was not someone that reached across the aisle. She was not somebody that wanted to communicate with other humans, and that was a big problem. And I feel like we're setting up how Natsumi is different from his grandmother, so maybe that will become a thing. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Zuri Care Joseph points out that Madara, apparently the mangaka in one of the extra features of the manga, talked about that originally Madara was supposed to be creepier, but he evolved into this cute little lucky cat form that is incredibly popular, and the mangaka is, quote, surprised at how popular Madara is. What's interesting is, I kind of think that, one, I don't think that making Madara creepy would necessarily have made him any less popular. I think of characters like Beetlejuice in like the American movie and how Beetlejuice is really popular despite how creepy he is. But also what this reminded me of was Gege Akutami and their series Jujutsu Kaisen, whereas they note that they hate the main character Gojo, but Gojo is insanely popular and Gege's like, I don't know why. So I feel like Madara and Gojo kind of have the same effect going on, where the fandom loves them and the creators are like, you guys do you. I honestly think what helps make Madara so popular is that he is a lucky cat when he's not in his he's the best of both worlds. He's a lucky cat when he's in his normal form, so it's something that's easily recognizable, so of course we connect with it. And then when he's in his yokai form, he's this big beautiful cat dragon. What is not to like? So I'm like, mangaka, you didn't think he'd be popular? What? So I just thought that was really, really fun. And then finally, Death to Boredom talks about how the Kappa in the episode 4, the Kappa or Kappa was the yokai that needed the water, kind of looked like a frog, and said that needing water is part of the folklore surrounding those yokai. And I told Death to Boredom that as long as the folklore doesn't reveal something that will be a plot or character development spoiler later on. I'm cool with learning about the yokai through the comments. I don't know a lot about Japanese folklore. I'm watching this show from a Western perspective. So there are going to be a lot of theories that I probably make about the yokai that are not correct. And I apologize ahead of time, but that's probably going to happen. That I'm going to make assumptions about these yokai because I don't know the folklore. But as long as there's no spoilers attached to them, and my mods will check anyway, so I just don't want you to waste your time writing, but as long as there's no spoilers to the character development or the plot of the story within the folklore of those yokai, I don't mind learning about them. I'm actually all on board with that. That's kind of something cool if people have information they want to share, or if you're from Japan and you're like, oh, I connect to this yokai and the folklore behind it. I think that's really fun, and I enjoy learning about that stuff there, so bring it on. I just probably will be theorizing about these yokai based on my own perspective, which does have a lack of knowledge about the folklore. So, my dogs are being silly. You'll have to excuse them. They're being grumbly. But I appreciate all the comments you all had for me. That was really cool. I'm so excited to dive into this next episode and just see what we get. So, with that being said, we are going to start episode 6 of Natsume Yujin-Cho, or Natsume's Book of Friends. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's dive in. This series is adorable. Oh my gosh. I told myself, I was like, with this series and with another series I'm watching, I'm like, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. Nope, you're not going to make me cry, show. And every time we get to a certain point in this episode, and I'm like, am I going to cry? Are the tears going to be shed? Because if you cried during this episode, I don't blame you. I don't blame you a bit. I was like, oh my gosh, this episode was beautiful. And I feel like it's really good to kind of talk about how Natsume's character is developing and growing in a very subtle way. But he started out, the series hating yokai. He was like, I don't like yokai. I don't like that I can see them. And this episode is such a check for him, because he feels like he's being chased by yokai, like they're trying to hurt him. He doesn't feel connected to them. He feel I feel like Natsumi started out this series very isolated, maybe kind of like Reiko. We don't know a lot about her upbringing and stuff like this yet, but we do know Natsumi's always felt very isolated, and he's always felt like he's not been wanted, and that he's not welcome anywhere, and he's not felt comfortable around other people. And I feel like in the last couple of episodes, he started to warm up to Tanama and maybe finding a kindred spirit with him. But the yokai have he's met a wide range of yokai that's kind of helped him to see that there are some that perhaps are, yokai that are okay with him being there, and that he can get along with and be friends with. Madara is just like a means to an end. Madara and him are having like a work relationship, right? But I really like all of these interpersonal relationships that Natsumi is slowly developing. And what I like about it is he's not perfect, and he isn't somebody that's naturally outgoing. So for him, this is difficult. I want to make also note that Kamiya's voice acting, there was a lot of Levi-isms in Natsumi's voice in this episode. Kamiya also plays the voice of Levi from Attack on Titan, and I heard a lot of Levi in this episode, and I was like, oh, it feels like more than usual. So I don't know if it's Kamiya like warming up to being Natsumi's voice now that we're 6 episodes in, but it definitely felt that way. So let's go through this episode. The swallow at the lake bottom. Oh my gosh. So apparently this dam, it's dried up, and it's just waiting for the monsoon rains to refill it. I also want to make note, they're like, the rainy season didn't last long this year, so it's about to go back up. I want to make note of a couple things. First, our 2 not best friend bro friends are, biking together. They bring Natsumi along, like you do. I really ship them. I'm trying to be very fair about it, but I really ship them. I want them to be together. But Natsumi, from the very get-go with the newsboy hat, which the newsboy hat does look good on him. He rocks it. You can tell he's not feeling well, and something's off. At first, I thought he was kind of like hiding, and it was done for comedic effect. But then when he has the heat stroke, it's like, oh, no. I get it. And I totally understand. Like when it's super, super hot outside, it is really easy to overheat. And I've had that happen once and I get that. I'm like, yeah, it all usually comes up in a big wave and you don't see it coming. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I don't feel good. And then bam, it just hits you like that. So we get some exposition from the bro, not friends. They're like, we won't be able to fish here. And then they see the village that was abandoned there. My thing was the village was just left. I'm like, the village that was submerged by the dam, I'm like, would they try to like clean all that out after it dries up? Or maybe they realize maybe it's a memorial and maybe they don't have permission to do so. I thought it was weird they just leave a village there and let it get submerged again, but maybe it's a memorial. Maybe they have rules that they can't do that. I thought that was interesting that they just left it there at the Futaba village. But yeah, the little spirit that's like, the little yokai that's like, hey, I'm here waving my hands like I just don't care. It was really humorous the way that demon was done. But I do feel for Natsumi a little bit here because they're like, oh, knock it off, Natsumi. Nobody would be in a place like that. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. And I do feel in that moment that Natsumi doesn't feel connected to them because he's like, he clearly can see something that they can't. And we've seen him go through this most of the series so far. I will say one thing. I am glad that his friends, Sasada and the two bro friends, I'm glad that they're nice to him and that they don't seem to judge him or try to bully him or ostracize him because they're like, oh, what are you talking about, Natsumi? They just kind of brush it off. And I guess in some ways that can be worse in a sense, but I'm glad he doesn't get bullied and, isolated by them even more. They still accept him, which is a big step, I think. But yeah, so he temporarily gets possessed, and I like we see the little feather float on the screen. Oh, the sign that she's a little sparrow spirit. Okay, cool. That's really neat. But yeah, she possesses him like you do. And then he ends up waking up and seeing the birds flying overhead. Also, want to make note, there's like 5 birds there. At first I thought there was 4 birds because there's but the 3 siblings and the parents. Oh my gosh, the 5 birds that are flying overhead and then him seeing that before he wakes up was like the last thing she saw before she died and turned into a demon. Oh my gosh, show! That's so brilliant! I love that! That's so brilliant! Yes! But anyway, so he wakes up, the Book of Friends is there, and Madara just pillbugs his way over there. He's like, what a wuss! Madara is such a troll. He's just like, what a wuss! What, you can't handle a little bit of a heat stroke? I'm like, Madara, what are you doing? But him noticing that something's up with Natsumi. Madara is interesting because Madara is very much a troll, and you can tell he's thinking of things at times, even when he doesn't present it. And there's several moments during this episode where you can tell Madara is thinking of something, but we don't know what he's thinking of, right? Because he's not saying it. We just see on his face he has this pensive expression. So yeah, this whole group, one of them looks like the little frog duck thing from Spirited Away. He looks like one of those yokai. Definitely looks noticeable. The Taru Saru, he's actually kind of creepy in this episode. He is actually kind of creepy. Like, at first I was like, oh, he's kind of cute. But the longer the series goes on and the episode goes on, you see the mouth move on the mask. And then when he turns into the other form, I'm like, oh, you're kind of creepy, actually. I don't know what to do with you. What do we do with you? But poor Natsumi, he has to just sit there and return all of their names. And Madara gets onto him being like, you're returning all these names and the book is thinning out. Like, hey, what are we doing? I thought you were going to keep that book for me to have once you were done. I do also appreciate the aunt doesn't seem to like think it's weird that he's up there talking to himself. But poor Natsumi wears himself out. You fool. The Book of Friends is thinner than ever. And so the guy's like, my humblest thanks, Natsudomo. And he's like, something is possessing you. You can see through my mirror. And we see the little sparrow spirit. Yeah. Poor Natsumi, I would have freaked out. I guess he doesn't freak out more because at this point he's used to spirits, but the idea that it's possessing him, I love that expression that he makes, like, oh, hell no. And he's like, you smelled funny. I feel like it's interesting, too, that Madara goes after Tsubame because she's a bird and he's a cat. So he's like, how dare they possess you when you belong to me? I like that he doesn't really care about Natsumi. He's just mainly like, I'm the only one that should be able to possess you. And Natsumi's like, now hold on, just a second. He's like, we didn't make that agreement. And then I also like that Madara's solution is just to headbutt. Now it makes sense. Maybe he was headbutting Sasada back in the other episode to make sure she wasn't possessed by a spirit. That's his go-to move. Lovely. Splendid, as they say. And then she looks like an older woman at first when she gets up with the bird mask and everything. But after Natsumi punches her and the mask breaks and the wig falls off, then it makes her look so much younger with the bob cut. And she has the symbol, I'm assuming it's of a sparrow on her. I don't know what that symbol is on her mask. I'm sure somebody in the comments will say it. But she's like, I couldn't leave on my own, so I possessed you when you passed by. There's someone I have to see. And then Madara immediately changes his tune whenever he realizes that she wasn't after the Book of Friends. She just wants to use Natsumi to find somebody. And Madara's like, oh, well, if you're not trying to steal the book from me, I guess. But then at first, he's sitting there looking like such a cute little doll. He's like, we refuse to help you. And she's like, I'm not asking you. It's hilarious. But yeah, she asks Natsumi if she can borrow his body to go see the other person, and Madara's like, no. And I love that she calls him a raccoon. Like, just like a little trash panda. Just calls him a raccoon, and Natsumi's like, well, I don't want to hear it from someone wearing a no mask. I want to look this up real quick while we have this. A no mask is part of Japanese culture. They signify their age, gender, social ranking. Okay, so the no mask was the mask that initially broke, right? Interesting. I don't know if that translation is entirely accurate because the mask she's wearing doesn't exactly look like that, but it was funny that she just follows him around like a little bird, and Natsumi's just like, ugh. Again, poor Natsumi, he's the only one that can see her, so he's like, I can't tell anybody about this, and she just follows him everywhere. More like a puppy dog than a bird. And finally he's like, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm going to help you find your friend. So that way you can leave me alone. Right? That way you're not following me around everywhere. I am surprised that the one yokai that were like the cheerleaders for him back in episode 3, I think, 2 or 3, they don't follow him around anymore. I just was expecting like it just to be the circus that gets bigger and bigger following him to the point where he's like, I need you all to leave. But she wants to find Taniozaki, the person who supposedly left her food and water. And so it's been 20 years since the village sank. I guess he would have been younger around that point. I was expecting Taniozaki to be like an old man. What I thought was going to happen was the guy that she was chasing after was like his son or descendant, and they've talked about how the yokai smell family relations on you, whether you're that person or not. So what I thought was going to happen was she was going to go after the young guy, finally be able to talk to him, and he was going to be like, oh, you must be my dad, and he was going to take her to see his father, and he would be older, and there'd be a moment. But instead, no, it's a little bit different. It's still very effective, it's just handled a little differently. I also love Sasada gets such the shaft in this episode. At first, she's like, oh, Taniozaki from Futaba Village, and Natsumi's like, yes, and she's like, never heard of him, and he's like, ugh. And then, when he gets, like, the spit take from the one friend that has the information, he spits all over her. Like, girl gets the shaft. She is put through the ringer in this show. Poor Sasada. Yeah. But yeah, so Kitamoto, the more handsome and dashing of the bro friends, happens to know people from that village because they relocated there. And he's like, I don't understand being desperate to see someone, but I'm happy for you. I think that line really got me in this episode because it speaks so much to Natsumi. Natsumi's like, I don't understand why you would be desperate to see someone, which means he doesn't have very big connections in his life that would warrant him really wanting to see someone. He doesn't have those deep relationships. And so for him to, through Tsubame, to witness what a deep committed relationship looks like and devotion towards someone, it's really touching to him. And he's just kind of like in awe that she could have all of these emotions towards a human, right? When all he's ever seen is humans be threatened to be eaten by the yokai. So for her to have such, devotion to him, it really touches him. We find out Natsumi's an only child, which is not surprising, but good to have confirmation. And then the story about her, like, and her siblings, we'll get to that in a second, but I was like, oh, you lost your siblings. And it didn't dawn on me at this point in time that she was a bird. But the hand-holding scene, okay, when he says, can I hold your hand? It harkened back to episode 3, where he makes friends with the one ghost that we think was a person, and then we find out that's the plot twist, they were a ghost, and he feels kind of betrayed by that. I felt like this moment was sort of the B-side to that, where we had Natsumi feel kind of betrayed by this yokai that he thought was human, so he didn't want to have anything to do with it, and now his kindness is like, well, that was then, this is now, and it allows him to take Tsubame's hand, and they kind of, start walking together. And I like that he wanted to say it was a nice feeling. Like, he's so kind-hearted and compassionate that instead of him saying, oh, your hand's cold, like, oh, you're a ghost, instead he was like, that's really nice on this hot summer day to hold hands with something cool. Oh, it just melts my soul. And then she says, that's why people take advantage of you, because you're kind. It's just so heartbreaking, right? So he's like, I wanted to say the coolness of her hand felt nice. She can predict the rain like a bird. And then he said, did you used to be a swallow? And she's like, oh yeah, I did. And so I kind of forgot that, because I'm not privy on Japanese folklore, I forgot that these yokai were once not only people, but could also have been animals that turned into humanoid yokai. I did not put 2 and 2 together on that, or I have forgotten it. So I was like, oh, so she could have been a human that turned into a yokai, kind of like the guy in the episode with the test of courage that was human that became a demon. Or you could be a bird that becomes a demon. Sky's the limit on where these yokai can come from. So that gives some interesting observations and notes, because we don't know where Madara and some of the other ones originated from, so good to know. But her story, oh my god. And we see Madara come out of the bushes, and he's like, why are you guys holding hands like a bunch of school kids? And I like that Natsumi's like, shut up. I feel like Madara was somewhat jealous of Natsumi befriending her, because Madara wants Natsumi all to himself. And she says, in the far distant past, I was just a baby bird. I fell from my nest, but a human picked me up and placed me back inside. But because my parents smelled the human scent and disliked it, they abandoned our nest. Yeah, if you find a baby bird, you probably should not pick it up. Just, not only for health reasons, but because that human scent, they'll be like, nope, and probably abandon it. So, yikes. That whole scene, though, where it was like the parents abandoned the nest, and then one by one, all the baby birds died. Oh my god, that was like, it wasn't graphic at all, and it was highly effective. I'm like, I'm reading some very graphic, violent, bloody manga right now. This was just as effective, and it didn't have a drop of blood. It was just like, it just showed it happening, and had these like, which baby birds look terrifying anyway, because they look so defenseless and just like gross. But them like just disappearing one after the other, leaving just her to die before their eyes even open up. That was not necessary. That was so terrifying and so sad. My heart was filled with sorrow, and then I became a demon. But one day a human began to leave food for me, and he came without fail. I was reminded of the warmth of the one who had picked me up. And then the village was flooded, and it was thanks to him I was able to rest peacefully. I like Madara's like boring. Like Madara was not finding the sympathy in that story at all. I'm like Madara, come on now. But poor Natsumi, he's just like, you can tell he's been affected by the story. He's like, because yeah, it was really sad. So then Kitamoto, he comes through, gets in the address, and I think the part that gets Natsumi so much is that as she's walking to him, they like run over. At first, I thought he was going to try to be like, oh, can you see this ghost? But again, Natsumi, he doesn't want anybody to know that he can see ghosts, so he tries to stay out of it and let her go see him herself, but he doesn't notice her at all. And just, I feel like the moment of her being right there, being like, hey, I'm here, see me, notice me, I'm right here, I want to talk to you, I want to connect with you, I want to connect with you, I want to be with you, and he just completely ignores her. I feel like that touches Natsumi so much because he can relate to her. He knows what it feels like to want to connect to people and they just see through him, or they don't understand what he's talking about and how he can't connect with people and his problems with it. And I feel like when he sees her trying to connect and failing, he feels so much of himself in that moment that you could just feel the emotion radiating off of him. And it was so sad. Like, just in that moment, he was just watching her try to get a hold of him. And the thing that's so crushing is that he's like, why? Only I can see her. She's so. Why am I the only one? And I feel like he feels so bad for her because he knows how good intention she is and kind she is. And he's like, why is a yokai so nice towards people and kind when they don't get any of that love returned? And so then we see the one Tarusaru up there watching. And at first I thought Tarusaru was like going to feel like, oh, Natsumi, you want to help. That's so nice of you. And he tried, like, the whole story with the yukata, I felt was, Tarusaru trying to, like, reward Natsumi by saying, yeah, here you go. Here's a way for you to help her. Because he's clearly been watching. But no, he's realized that Natsumi has an attachment to her. So he's going to prey off of that and try to eat him. And I was like, oh my God, that's terrifying. And Natsumi talks to her and says, why do you have to go back if you like him that much? And she's like, well, I did at one point think of possessing him. And Madara's like, did you now? And she says, but I want to rest alongside my brothers and sisters. Oh, it's so heartbreaking. She's like, thank you from the bottom of my heart. So then Natsumi's like, I don't feel like this is good. He's like, I don't feel like it's good to just leave her and let her be when she wasn't able to connect with him. Like, that's not fair. And he's been sitting there watching her day in and day out go to see him. And when we can't see his face, when we can't see Natsumi's face, as her time going after him gets shorter and shorter and she's losing strength, and you can't see Natsumi because his eyes are covered up by his hair, I was like, oh, that part was starting to get to me too. I was like, oh, that's so heartbreaking, because he sees how hard she's trying and she just can't connect. Oh, her strength is waning. Yeah, and that's when he gets confronted by Tarusaru, who tells him about the festival, where he's like, oh yeah, there's going to be a yukata that can turn people into humans, and drinking and dancing, and Natsumi's like, hold on, you have it, yukata can turn you into a human. And it did sound a lot like it was a big coincidence, this is all happening at once, but I thought he was just trying to help him, like legit. I was just as fooled as Natsumi, and Madara just happens to be in the area, just happens to be there to see Natsumi, and is like, what's going on? And the moment he says the festival, Madara's like, oh, hell no. He's like, you'll be eaten, Natsumi. He's like, you fool, I'm the only one that can eat you. And Natsumi's like, we never agreed on that. I love the creepiness of when Tarusaru like changes into his larger form. That part was great. And you have these two spirits like going at each other, and Natsumi's in the middle of them. And Natsumi's like, we didn't make this promise. And I like that Madara has like the little sweat drop when he says that. He's like, shut up, I'm trying to look cool. It's great. It's great. He's like, Sensei, would you take me there? I've got to get that yukata. And I like that Madara's like, there's no benefit to you. Why are you doing this? And Natsumi's like, because they're my friend. He's like, why are you doing this? There's no benefit to you. And he's like, I like her. What's wrong with doing something for a friend? And that gets Tarusaru to go, okay, fine, interesting. I feel like, I don't know. We don't have a lot with Reiko yet. But I feel like the moment he said, what's wrong with doing something for a friend, that got Tarusaru's like attention that that Natsumi was like Reiko and she said that before, or that he's the opposite of Reiko and Reiko said the opposite of that. So again, I don't know. He says that he's never had such conversations of such length with Reiko as he has with Natsumi, so meaning she was pretty short with him. So I don't know. I just think I love the idea that Natsumi's like, he says, "You utter fool." Madara's like, "This is why I hate kids." But Natsumi just being so nice and wanting to help her because she's a friend. And there's nothing like, there's a part of me that was like, man, if she was a human, I would probably ship her with Natsumi, but she's a sparrow spirit, so we can't do that. I do want to know what his little mask means, because he has a different symbol than she did. I want to know what their masks mean, maybe, interestingly enough. And so they're like, yeah, the first to touch the yukata gets to be the victor. Now, I knew that Madara was going to help him. There was no way he was going to get it otherwise, as Madara's up there in his little pillbug pose. He's so cute. But I feel like Madara, he's going to try to let Natsumi do it on his own, and the longer it goes on, the more he sees that he's going to fail, he's like, fine. Again, I feel like that connection to Reiko encourages Madara to help Natsumi. But I also think that eventually, I think that down the road, Madara is going to help Natsumi, not because he's Reiko's grandson, but because he's Natsumi. That's just what I see. But oh my god, that little like belly flop into the crowd and he turns into his like dragon cat form is great. I love that so much. And then they look like Falcor Never Ending Story as he like helps him up to get the yukata. Oh. And then Tsubame. She's like, it's gonna rain. He's like, he's attending a city festival. Take this and go. And then the moment he said, thank you for not hating humans. And she's like, oh, well, of course. She's like, I love those who are kind. And I love those who are warm. So yeah, I love humans. And her giving him a hug. Oh. Oh. And her telling him thank you. Like, we don't know, like, what Natsumi's, we know his childhood's not been great, and he's not had a lot of people, like, thank him or offer him, like, this kind of compassion. So, for him to get it from her is so freaking sweet. Oh, I love that little scene between them where he gives her the hug. That was so good. And then he helps her. I was really surprised. I figured we would get to see the meetup between them, but we really don't. We just see her go after him, and then it rained and covered the village back up. And that's that. And I like Natsumi, like going back on the bike with Madara in his little newsboy hat. Madara says it's easy for those who are bound to a place to return to it, which I think is interesting. I was wondering in the episode if that would have something to do with Reiko maybe, and the fact that all these spirits, it's easy for them to come find Natsumi because he's at Reiko's. I thought that maybe that would be something to dwell upon. But she may have gone to her next life, and Natsumi's like, I really hope so. Oh. And so then, I like Madara's like, you're always dragging me into this, Natsumi. Good grief. And he's like, well, you're going to be with me to the end, aren't you? And Madara's like, well, does that mean I can eat you? And he's like, maybe you'll be attached to me. And I was like, if that's not foreshadowing, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. And then Madara's like, well, what about you? Are you going to get attached to me? He's like, I really don't know. But then he talks about seeing the girl, and the guy's like, oh yeah, I met her. She didn't say much, but I got a picture of her. So that's cool. And then the photo he has shows her as a human without the mask on. And then his eyes start to tear up. Oh. Because she looks so at peace in that moment. Like, yeah. In that moment, she looks so at peace. Like she was just happy to be there. Oh. Like an angel. A little sparrow angel. I'm like, don't you start crying, Natsumi. Don't you start putting the waterworks on. Nope. Oh. And Madara's like, why are you crying? I like them too. Their warmth, their gentleness. Hearts devoted to finding the things that will draw them together. I love that. I love Natsumi saying that it's not just ghosts, it's not just humans, it's anything that is warm and compassionate and is trying to draw each other together is something that he will seek out. And I'm like, oh, this episode was so good. It was so sweet. Madara had lots of pillbug moments. He was looking super, super cute. But I love Tsubame. I love the little sparrow spirit. She was so sweet. And I'm so sad. It's like, I felt that Natsumi, like, you almost wanted to ship him and her together because they had, like, such a genuine connection. And he really was nice. But he did say, like, she's my friend. I want to help her. And I'm just like, oh. I want to help her too, Natsumi. This episode was absolutely adorable and sweet, and I cannot wait to hear your comments about it. So I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction discussion. I'm going to be sad that Tsubame is gone, but this episode was wonderful. So I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more of Natsume Yujin-Cho, Natsume's Book of Friends. Bye!